Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
Seeing as electrophysiology has taken up around 80% of my thoughts this past year, I thought it was only fitting for me to write a blog about it. In this blog, I'm going to take you through what electrophysiology is, why it's such a powerful tool in neuroscience, and how I use it on a day-to-day basis during my PhD. First off, what is electrophysiology and how does it work? Electrophysiology is a laboratory technique used to measure the electrical properties of cells and tissues. It allows us to detect how cells generate and respond to electrical signals by reading voltage changes in the cell membrane and measure the current that flows through it. Electrophysiology approaches can help us to understand how excitable a cell is, how strongly it communicates with neighbouring cells, and how its activity changes in response to drugs or in disease. In neuroscience, these recordings provide an insight into how neurons process information, both on their own and as a part of a network, and how their function may become altered in disease. As part of my PhD, I do both whole cell patch clamp recordings and extracellular field recordings. I use electrophysiology to study Alzheimer's disease, specifically how tau modulates ion channel dysfunction. Whole cell patch clamp recordings allow me to study this at the level of an individual neuron. In this technique, a very fine glass microelectrode is brought into contact with the cell membrane and forms a high resistance seal. Once this seal is established, gentle suction is then applied to rupture the patch of membrane beneath the pipette tip, giving us access to inside of the cell. In the lab, we call this breaking through. This configuration, known as whole cell mode, allows us to directly measure the membrane voltage and the ionic currents that flow across the neuronal membrane. It now becomes possible to measure how the neuron responds to electrical signals, how easily it fires action potentials, and how its membrane properties may change in health and disease. I also use extracellular field recordings to look at this at a network level. I do these recordings in the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for learning and memory. In these recordings, I induce long-term potentiation, which is a form of synaptic plasticity involved in learning and memory. This is the process where we make long-term memories. To do this, I use one electrode to stimulate the Schaefer collateral pathway originating in the neurons in the CA3 region of the hippocampus, and then a second electrode recording the response in the CA1 region. This allows me to assess exactly how tau affects synaptic plasticity and how it may disrupt neuronal networks in a brain region which is critical for learning and memory. For the purpose of this blog, I'm going to focus primarily on whole cell patch clamp recordings, the most technically difficult between these two techniques, and the first technique I learnt during my PhD. I still remember the first time I successfully patched a cell. After weeks of broken pipettes and failed seals, I actually cried tears of joy when I saw that first stable recording appear on the screen. I know it sounds dramatic, but anybody who has learnt to patch clamp will probably understand exactly why. Before any recording could begin, we have to run distilled water through the rig to make sure that any residual salts have been removed from the tubing. Most of the time, the distilled water just flows in through the inflow tube, around the bath, out through the outflow tube, and into the waste. If there is a blockage, this is the first hurdle of the day. Typically, you have to dismantle the tubing bit by bit until you find the source of the blockage, and then blast water through it to unblock it, and then put everything back together again. So now you have your inflow and outflow working. It's time to turn the rig on. There are two types of recordings that you can make on the rig, using voltage clamp and current clamp. In voltage clamp, you hold the cell at a particular voltage and then record the current, and in current clamp, you hold the cell at a particular current and record the voltage. Sounds simple, right? Well, sometimes the rig can overload and it will be stuck in the wrong clamp. This can be for a number of reasons, usually because a tiny wire has gotten wet when it's not meant to. Once you have made sure you're in the right clamp, you've got heated artificial cerebrospinal fluid, which we call ACSF, flowing through your rig and nothing's blocked, it's time to get your tissue. Something that every wholesale patch clamp electrophysiologist can relate to is learning how to find the pipette. The objective is submerged under ACSF, and you need to move the pipette into the liquid and focus on the tip of the pipette underneath the objective. I can safely say it took me and my friend an extremely long time, and countless broken pipette tips to successfully achieve this. Not that I've ever admitted this to anybody, but at the time I was learning, I actually had dreams about the pipette tip. Every new wholesale patch clamp electrophysiologist that I meet, we always laugh and say, "Do you remember how long it took you to learn how to find the pipette?" and compare times. In fact, my friend actually turned to me when we were learning, not joking, and said, "Becky, if I can never find the pipette, am I going to have to change PhD projects?" We laugh about this now, and it's on our lab howlers list, and it seems like such a long time ago we were just starting out. Everybody takes to wholesale patch clamp differently, and you have to have a certain amount of resilience to master the technique. Me and my housemate learned at the same time, and at the time, it's so hard not to compare yourself to others when you're both learning the same skill. It took me a little longer to get the hang of it than my housemate, and to be honest, it was quite disheartening. Looking back now, you definitely shouldn't compare yourself to others. We are all on our individual journeys, and I'm so glad I persevered. It was so worth it. Recently, teaching a new PhD student how to patch has reminded me exactly how steep that learning curve really is. Now, being able to sit in a row with my lab mates, all patching side by side, is definitely one of my favourite parts of the PhD. I'd say that the bane of every electrophysiologist's life is electrical noise. You can have your rig working perfectly one day, not move anything, and then the next day you're faced with so much electrical noise you can't record anything. You then put your hand on every single crocodile clip you can see to try and find the source of the noise. Sometimes the noise just goes away completely on its own. I think it's a phantom force. My PhD supervisor always says that electrophysiology rigs are sent to testers, and I truly believe that. Even when you finally spend what seems like the whole day troubleshooting the rig and everything's working again, the next problem can be something as simple as discovering that the micropipette has been pulled just slightly too thick or thin, and it's the wrong shape to seal onto a cell. Something that I was really shocked about when I started electrophysiology was just how long you can record from a cell. Just a few days ago, my lab mate said that she'd been recording from a singular neuron for a whole hour. My supervisor always says, every cell is a golden nugget, and when a beautifully healthy neuron comes into view, he says, "Oh, that's a beautiful one, that is," which has quickly caught on with all of us in the lab. I'm lucky enough to have two amazing supervisors. They both make the lab environment such an enjoyable one to be in. And even if we're having rubbish patching days and nothing's working as it should, we all still manage to have a laugh. Like many lab techniques, it can be so easy sometimes to get carried away being sat on the rig in your lab bubble and forget the bigger picture. In my opinion, being able to record individual neurons firing and the electrical activity of a singular cell is one of the coolest things I've ever done. To think it will ultimately contribute to finding a treatment to Alzheimer's disease is something that I feel so incredibly honoured to be able to do. I will leave you with a photo of me and the wholesale patch clamp rig. I'm going to finish by giving my advice to anybody at the start of their electrophysiology journey. The first bit is troubleshooting is just a part of the skill. Embrace the chaos. Number 2, even if it feels easy to, never compare your progress learning to patch to anyone else. Everybody learns at their own pace, and you're doing great. And finally, keep going and don't give up. You will be amazing.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.